Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Minori Irvintern, and I'm Executive Editor of International for Variety. Welcome to Day 3 of the BFI Future Film Festival 2023. We have our in-venue events continuing on our final day tomorrow at the BFI South Bank, alongside the free online program for our audiences across the UK and worldwide to explore. You can check out tomorrow's program on the BFI website. But now, please enjoy my interview with Jane Tranter. Shall we get cracking, Jane? Because I know there's quite a few questions here, and I want to make sure that there's time for everyone to sort of hear from you, really, because I'm actually really interested in some of this. The granular questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Minori, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. No, I'm like I said, I'm like, these are some of the types of questions are the ones that I normally am able to really ask in interviews as well. So I'm just quite interested. But yeah, I thought we would just start by, talking a little bit about your early years, because from what I understand, Jane, you were born in Oxford. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing there.
So I was actually born in Potter's Bar, in Barnet, okay. But my parents moved to Oxford when I was quite young, in the early years. My parents were both teachers. Working class family, that classic kind of 50s grammar school education, changed life for the daughter of a miner and the son of a Lancashire mill worker, got themselves good education, became teachers. So I was, and we went to Oxford because my father got a job there in a teacher training college, and I was brought up in that quasi academic teacher training, very strong Methodist upbringing, complete absence of showbiz on any level in any way whatsoever. Happy, straightforward upbringing.
Got it. So how did you sort of, where did that exposure to the arts, to film and television, really sort of come from for you?
Well, it started all through books. So I was a voracious reader from an early age, and I loved book serializations, and or any really, really big, thick book. So I think that was a sort of early leaning towards enjoying storytelling being told in a kind of like episodic form. I was lucky enough that my parents took me to the theatre a lot, and occasionally the cinema. Television was, my parents had a very different attitude towards television than I had or have, obviously. They liked it, but it wasn't on the whole time, and there was a slight monitoring of what you can watch, which actually worked out really brilliantly for me, because it meant when I watched it, it felt like a real occasion and something special. And it also meant that I started to watch television secretly when they were out. And I think that's what made me really begin to wonder about this as a sort of form. And it almost felt something which wasn't that it was forbidden, but it wasn't as strong a place to tell your stories as, say, the theatre or cinema, which as a child growing up obviously meant that I was intrinsically drawn to that place.
No, absolutely. I could totally see that. But your first sort of entry into the industry was really through radio, wasn't it?
Yes.
How did you get and it was at the BBC, I understand. How did you get your foot in the door there? What was your trajectory because that's quite a leap, I would say.
Yes. So I mean, this was way back in the day. So this was in like the mid 1980s. And I did an English degree at London University. I chose London University because I wanted to have access to all the theatres. I believed that London was where my destiny was, and I really wanted to get to know the city. I think there's something quite healthy at being brought up at the end of a branch line, and always feeling that you've got this place, you've got this sort of mecca of entertainment to head for. And I saw my university career as spending 3 years training for what I was going to do next, as opposed to 3 years particularly studying for a degree. So I went to see every play that I could. I went to the cinema as much as I could. And I had got a training as a secretary. So I was a good fast typer, and I could do bits of shorthand and those things that you needed to do in those days. And it meant I could get temporary jobs, which I did with anything that had a hint of the entertainment industry attached to it. So, for example, I got a temporary job with a firm of accountants, which I did because they looked after a couple of actors' accounts. You know, I'd be sort of drawn to that the whole time. But it meant that when I left university, I didn't have to look at a training type of job. I could go into a job somewhere. And I remember very clearly, I had an offer of 3 jobs that all came in within about a 24-hour period. So one was supposedly my dream job, which was working as a secretary to a number of assistant directors at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And that had been something I really felt, I really want to, work for the Royal Shakespeare Company, because that felt a wholesome form of entertainment. The other was I got offered a job as a trainee buyer at Liberty's, which is a sort of strange but true fact, that I was always very interested in design and textile and clothing and beautiful things. And I thought maybe that might be something I would do. And then I got offered a job as a secretary to someone called Richard Imeson, who was quite a big figure in radio drama. And I did that. I literally just went and knocked on the door of HR in Portman Place in the BBC, in a way you could in those days. There's no dropping someone an email. And I went for an interview. And during that interview, they said, there is a job that might suit you, and walked me over to Radio Drama Building. And I met Richard Imeson, and he offered me the job. And I took that one as opposed to any of the others, not because I was particularly interested in radio, but I wasn't disinterested. I love the afternoon play, but because they were working on a play with Arthur Miller. And I thought that one day I might pick up the phone and Arthur Miller would be at the end of it. And I began to realize that what the radio drama community offered was access to live writers, people who were actually doing it and living it at that moment in time. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And so in I went.
That's very cool. And still, so obviously you had sort of a more theater focused position, but then this also was kind of had a little bit of both fields, wasn't it? So it seemed like it was right.
It was easier. It was easier for me in a way. I think I needed to take steps before just didn't have the confidence to go straight into screen or television, which is, I think, partly because there's so much smoke and mirrors and sort of myth and glamour surrounding them. And if you don't know, I mean, literally, I knew no one. And if you don't know anyone, it's not just a kind of like, well, it's not a question of what you know, it's who you know, and they'll help get you a job. You don't know what the jobs are. And you don't know whether or not where you'd come in the pecking order of people applying. Are you a good candidate or a hopeless candidate? You need an awful lot more confidence than I had then to be able to go straight in. So radio felt like a good place for me to be, and where I could just sit and watch and listen and work out what I might possibly do next.
Absolutely. And what other skills did you sort of cultivate there that have stayed with you for the rest of your career?
I think, really the big thing I learned when I was in radio drama, and I wasn't there for a very long period of time, was I learned how important it was to get over yourself, and whatever the job it is that you were doing, just do that job well. Nobody wants to promote someone because someone wants to be promoted, or even because someone perhaps has got the capability of doing a different job. They will promote you, they will mentor you if you are doing a good job. And to my very, very great shame, and it still lives with me, I did not do the best job by any means whatsoever that I could have done at radio drama. I got there, And once I sort of got the hang of it, I was just like the most irritating Reese Witherspoon from Election kind of character who just sort of sat there with their hand in the air saying, I'll do it, let me do it, I'm bored, why can't I do this, why can't I do that? And looking back on it, I can see how annoying it was for everyone. And every now and again, people did tell me it was annoying. There was the woman who kind of ran the department actually suggested at some point that I might like to go and get a job working as a secretary in the city, wearing a nice navy blue suit, because she could see this wasn't going to work out. And I was so shocked by that sort of piece of it. I mean, it was kindly meant advice, but it was so wrong in so many ways for me, but so right for me, because it clearly, nothing was quite working, that it shook me, and it made me do two things. One, it made me smarten up my act and think, I'm not providing good service here. This is all the wrong way around. What am I thinking of? And the other thing is that it allowed her to help me to make a move from radio to television, because she could see that the sort of move upwards in radio was too funneled, whereas in television there are a lot of different jobs you could apply for. And she was unbelievably kind in putting me in contact with someone in television who gave me a good helping hand to get a job in television as a secretary. So, my biggest lesson was really one of failure. That was not a promising start to my BBC career in any shape or size at all. And the sort of shame and awareness of that stuck with me and just made me really focus down and grow up and understand that you've got to be good at your job before anyone else will give you another job.
But so I'm confused, because it sounds like you were really ambitious and really persistent, but are you saying that you just the opportunities weren't necessarily there, so you weren't being focused enough? Because it sounds like, you were really keen and very eager to sort of do whatever it is they sent your way. Was it just that there was just nowhere really to go?
There was nowhere really to go, and it's also that it was like I wanted a different job than the one I'd been offered. So a secretaries in radio drama at that time, you would go into the studio with your boss, who was a producer, and the studios, they record the plays in 2 or 3 days, and you were almost like a sort of continuity person. And I was just desperate to get into the studio, and the person I worked for didn't go in the studio much. And I was kind of like, why doesn't he go in the studio more? It was just I'm sure it wasn't quite as bad as I made out, and I certainly tried, but I think I had to learn a piece of advice, which I often give people, which is, when you want to learn about the industry, get yourself a job where you can give good service in that job, and where you can watch and learn while disguising your intent. Because having somebody who's kind of like, for example, wants to be a director, go on the floor as an assistant director, as a floor runner, because you can watch what the director's doing, and you can really, really listen without kind of busting up to the director the whole time and go, tell me about the shot you're doing and what, because the director's got other things they want to do. But get a job where you can really observe and watch and learn by that director's mistakes as well as what that director does well. And I had to learn to do this while disguising my intent, which actually BBC television was a brilliant, brilliant place to do that. But I definitely didn't do that at the start.
Well, tell me a little bit about the transition then. So there was obviously a gatekeeper who was very good in terms of allowing you to see that path and seeing that kind of for you as well. Was it, was she right in the sense that it was the better fit for you, and there were more kind of roots in, basically?
Yeah, no, it was absolutely right, and it was anyway what I wanted to do. I just didn't quite know how to get there. It was television was a lot less accessible than radio was at that time, and when I joined, television, BBC television drama, everyone, it was a very much an in-house capacity in the 1980s. So there were in-house producers and in-house script editors and in-house production managers and in-house assistant floor managers and in-house script editors, and everyone was housed in this building in Shepherd's Bush, Union House and Threshold House in Shepherd's Bush. And then the television plays department, as it was called then, was up the road in Television Centre. So we were all together. So when I went in as a secretary, I shared a room with the producer I was working for, which is a really late great producer called Leonard Lewis. So I was able to follow everything he did all day and try and help him in whatever way I could. I learned I had to give good service and be efficient and make his life easier and better. But at the same time, all I had to do was run up the stairs to where the production offices were of the shows that he was working on. And in the production office would be the director and the production manager and the assistant floor managers and the script supervisors. And there was a whole community there to learn from. And everyone socialized together. Literally, everyone went to the pub at lunchtime, which was like a kind of like right eye opener for me. And obviously none of that happens anymore. And I learned an awful lot from my peer group, and I learned an awful lot from being in the office with Leonard Lewis. So I just soaked it all up like crazy and found the whole life very liberating, and began to understand how television pieces were put together. So it was a really strong experience.
And you sort of, your entry point was really the soaps, right? Like EastEnders was something that you worked on. Is that right, Jane?
Yes.
Yeah.
So after I've been a secretary at the BBC for a while, working for Leonard Lewis on a show. It was a new police series called Rockliffe Babies. So the BBC launched its medical drama Casualty and its police drama Rockliffe Babies at the same time, one of which is an extraordinary, I think it's celebrating its 40-year history or something, or 30 years, something incredible. Soon. And the other was Rockliffe Babies, which went for 2 seasons. But the BBC had an in-house training scheme which you could apply for, and you could apply for it outside the BBC or inside the BBC. And I applied for it and got an attachment as an assistant floor manager. And in order to apply for it, you had to do a lot of theatre. So I considered, which again is a piece of advice I would strongly give to anyone starting out in the industry. I consider myself as having 2 jobs. I had my secretarial job that I did and really enjoyed during the day. And then I would go off and do my other job, which was my job to try and get me an advancement, if you like, to come out behind the desk and into the next one. And I decided that I'd go for being an assistant floor manager. So I had to get as much theatre experience as possible. So I produced various plays and took them to the Edinburgh Festival, made sure I'd really hone my stage management skills and all that kind of thing. So that I was ready when I went for my interview I was sort of ready to show that I could do that assistant floor manager, which is the equivalent of a second assistant role. And I got really, really lucky that the first show that they put me on to train on was EastEnders. And EastEnders was in relatively early days at that time. It was the time of Anita Dobson and Leslie Grantham, which was amazing. Anita Dobson, who I'm currently working with now in Doctor Who, a phenomenal woman. And I was really lucky. I was put with another assistant floor manager, someone called Adam Brown, who's now a producer, and he literally just taught me everything. And on EastEnders, because of the repetition of a soap, you learn very quickly. You learn that on a Monday you do this, on a Tuesday you do this, and on a Wednesday you do that, and on Thursday and a Friday you record. There's a cycle to it, which means you can catch up with what it is that's being done very quickly. And you go through a lot of different directors and a lot of different scripts, and there's a big cast. And I did 2 cycles on EastEnders. It was kind of like about a year and a half working there, and I absolutely loved it and learnt. I mean, that was the foundation of everything, really.
That's incredible. I mean, just to clarify as well, how old were you at this point?
23, 24, I think. 24. Yeah, 23, 24, I think was the age, yeah.
And did anybody advise you that, kind of after work, you would have to go and get this additional sort of theater experience? Or was that just something you kind of picked up, like, in order to get there, I'll probably need this skill set? Or did somebody help you?
No, I just watched and learnt and looked at what other people had that I didn't have. I mean, in a way, there was part of me, a bit of fear is not such a bad thing. I didn't come from a family who had any money to support me. I just had to get a job. I hadn't really made a great success of anything at university. I concentrated on what it's like to live in London. I conquered London more than I conquered doing an English literature degree. I wasn't fantastically focused, and I gambled in becoming a secretary. It's very difficult, and anyone who's been an assistant, as they're called now, or a secretary then, will understand that there's kind of like a pressure to get out from the desk, unless you are a career assistant, which is a great job in and of itself. But if you are using it as a stepping stone, there's a pressure to get out from behind the desk. And it was, a lot of my peer group were, when I was still a secretary and earning a really, really, really tiny amount of money, were off doing all sorts of other things, and climbing that career ladder. And I was frightened that, in all honesty, that I would not be able to do it. I have huge imposter syndrome, and just thought I wouldn't make it work. So I had to work hard in order to try and give it my best shot. So I literally just worked that out for myself.
Understood. Got it. And you then obviously you were script editing, and from my job and how I've seen sort of people break in, that really seems to be like a very, very pivotal sort of skill set that's helped people really get into then writing and all the rest of it. Tell us a little bit about sort of the importance of script editing for you and just in general.
So that was my move, really. So if I got out from behind the desk as a secretary to become an assistant floor manager, I wanted to get out from doing that practical production stuff, which I love doing. And by the way, that is a great job for someone in their 20s. You're off with the circus of a film crew, you're going to different places, you have a defined role, you're working as a team, but you're individual within that. You're, meeting these incredible actors. It just was the best fun. But I knew that I didn't want to work my way up through that production ladder. I didn't want to be a production manager and a line producer. I wanted to work with the writers. And I that was that love of storytelling and wanting to get to the pages again that really came through. And I was really lucky because of that community of people working together in Union and Threshold House. I have met a number of the script editors, and they'd talked to me about what they'd done. A lot of them had come from being an assistant floor manager in some way, and I just read scripts for people and sort of hung about, being interested in the jobs they were doing. And by the way, actually, if you want to be a script editor or you want to work in scripts in whatever way, reading scripts for people for free and writing reports is a really valuable thing, that a good service that you can offer. So I did this consistently on Casualty, which was a show I absolutely adored. And finally, on season 4 of Casualty, I got offered the job as an assistant script editor. working to the script editor herself, who's a woman called Sue Box, and I'm working with a number of writers who actually I went on to work with again and again and again. Pete Bowker, Bill Gallagher, Paul Abbott was writing around that time. There were lots of people that we all kind of like moved on to do other things. And being a script editor essentially means that you are the writer's best help and they are their best friend. One writer said to me once that the best thing a script editor can do is be the person in the room who will always take the writer's side on things. And I think it's really important, you know, in the practical world of television, when a writer is getting noted out of existence, not on character or story, but often on we can't afford to do it, it's not practical, how are we going to do this, that and the other, that there's someone in the room who's only looking at it from their point of view. So it's just a brilliant, I mean, I think being a script editor is probably the best job in the entire world. And I think that every job I have ever done is in its own way a variation on being a script editor. It's always for me come back to the script and how to best help a writer get the best script out that they can.
That's really interesting. Why do you say that about writers as well, Jane? Is that just sort of the pace and the great churn of streaming and sort of all the rest of it these days, and high production values, and sorry, I'm deviating slightly in terms of the career trajectory, but just I'm interested in what you just said.
You mean in terms of writers having all the notes?
Oh no, just in what you just mentioned about sort of the writer is kind of getting a little bit squeezed out now.
Oh, I see. Well, no, I don't think the writers getting squeezed out. But I think there are a lot of asks of a writer in modern television that there weren't before. So if you think of what television was and where it is, you know, to some extent, the very kind of like core of television is two people talking to each other in a room, beautifully filmed and captured, you know, every bead of sweat, every nuance, everything captured. And to me, that is literally the core and the beating heart of television. But out of that has grown so many more things. Out of that, television now, high-end television has production values, which means we have action adventure sequences. We can have massive set pieces with crowds and crowds of people, either real or digitally enhanced. We have fantasy. We have actors acting in front of green screens to kind of little baubles that will eventually be realized as a creature. And it's a lot of production stuff on a writer that wasn't previously there, because television, particularly British television, was always quite a naturalistic art form, very much leaning into a sort of social realism. Even in its sci-fi and fantasy, it had those roots, and that really is changing. And so writers are having to become very, very tied in to the whole production process and be able to, I mean, ask Jack Thorne on his Dark Materials this, and be able to kind of, when we go, well, I'm really sorry, but you know, we simply can't make that iceberg happen, either for practical or, you know, financial reasons. So what are we going to do? And there's a production draft used to be something which is just a writer tidying up with the right locations or scene numbers or however that's needed for production. And now a production draft is often all right, we're going to cut this. We think we need to add this. Could you look at it? There's a lot, sometimes, not always, but sometimes in television, there's a lot of technical asks of a writer.
Right. Yeah.
And they really need someone to be their best friend through that. And I'm really aware of that. You know, often I'm the person who's asking them to make all these changes and shifts, and they need people who will, you know, back their corner for when enough, or help them understand that, you know, if you want this to be realized as visually brilliantly as you do, you know, trust what the visual effects supervisor is saying. Let's find a way to make this work for you.
So interesting. Wow. And so obviously you were at the BBC now, this, this entire period. You then made the move to ITV, rival broadcaster ITV. How did that experience compare to everything that you were used to?
I mean, it was a massive, massive shock in so many ways. So I've been working my way up through the ranks of the BBC. It wasn't an unheard of trajectory. Secretary, assistant floor manager, script editor, trainee producer. So in modern parlance, assistant, second assistant director, script editor, development producer is probably how it'd be called now. And I wanted to produce. There's a whole community of our script editors, all of whom were kind of like, jostling to get, the next piece to produce. And ITV changed. Suddenly the franchises were sort of sold off, and Thames Television became Carlton Television, the worst named television channel in the world, which took over the London weekday franchise. And I'd always felt that a particular pull to Thames Television, Verity Lambert had been there. She was a real icon of television. I thought, Verity Lambert at Thames Television, and then she ran Euston Films, and she went to America, and she's made all these incredible shows. She's just utterly brilliant and glamorous, and everything I'd ever loved had been made by Verity Lambert, kind of thing. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity at the new London weekday franchise holder, and they were looking for a assistant commissioning editor. And it was a real leap of faith, because it was a very different place. I went from a very firm structure to something that felt very unfirm. Carlton Television was a publisher broadcaster. It had no in-house facility, which I wasn't used to. It was like Channel 4. So I had to get to know lots and lots of indies very quickly, which was a massive eye-opener, and I think really taught me a lot. And it had a whole different commissioning system. To say it was misogynistic is the massive understatement to end all understatements. I mean, obviously television in the 80s, at the BBC was clearly extremely misogynistic, but this was misogynistic about what you put on screen in a way that it never was. The BBC was very misogynistic behind the screen, if you like, but it would never, obviously it had loads of shows that had women helming them, both in front and behind the camera. And I remember in the early days putting various suggestions for television pieces up to the ITV commissioning system, and being told very firmly that there would never be a female lead of a cop show without a man by her side. Now, obviously that just, as soon as that gets said out loud, along comes Helen Mirren and the wonder that was Sally Head, and, Prime Suspect happened, but it took a while for that to happen. And I was very shocked by all of that, and had to try and find cunning ways round what could be done. There was a sense that you could do certain pieces with women. It wasn't that they weren't there at all, obviously, but you couldn't have a genre piece headed up by a woman. So, you worked around all of that. And it's weird looking back on it now, how you just thought, oh, okay, all right then. So we'll think of something else, as opposed to, for fuck's sake, what are you doing? But it was just a very, very, very different life. Unlike the BBC, you kind of, that drive for ratings was huge. You felt very, very connected with the audience as a result. And I think critically for me, in terms of, what I went on to do in my career, I saw a television channel being grown from the ground up, which was really the reason I left the BBC and went to Carlton, because I thought, when else am I going to have an opportunity at working at a television channel as it's being formed? So I was there for a year while we were kind of like pulling all the programs and desperately making all the programs, and then there for its launch. and birth. And that was, you know, I was in every meeting as quite a young person in the industry. I was at the big meetings with all the heads of department, all the commissioners. I heard what Factual was thinking, what entertainment, what comedy was thinking. Obviously, myself and my boss were there talking about drama. And I learned a lot about television really quickly.
How do you think that experience of moving from the BBC to somewhere like ITV would compare? So, you know, someone making that trajectory now compared to then, have things?
I don't think it would be anywhere near as shocking. I mean, in a way, you know, television, the BBC's changed so much. So the BBC's in-house capacity has just changed beyond recognition, and is that wholly separate BBC Studios thing. So in a way, what you've got at the BBC is a group of is a commissioning group, which is exactly the same as ITV have had since the early 90s, and they changed the way they did everything. So you're simply moving from one commissioning group to another. I think that whilst I think the sort of DNA that runs through the sort of, you know, the sinews of the BBC and ITV are different, they are united in terms of drama and wanting to get the best written, the best performed, the highest quality drama in front of their audiences as they can. I think the biggest shock probably, if you move from the BBC to ITV today, would be how much of the ITV work is dominated by genre. And I think that would be a very different shift. But I think it's not. Culturally, ITV in the early 90s was still a place of the sort of the last of the robber barons and all of the different ITV franchises, and the BBC was full of, you know, people who've been, you know, mainly men who've been educated in Oxford or Cambridge, and ITV was not like that at all. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the freshness of it and the toughness of it. And despite everything, it was an incredibly vibrant place to be.
That's so interesting to hear about the changes there, and how different it was. But you did ultimately return to the BBC right after about 5 years. What brought you back?
Unquestionably, I think in the main, what brought me back to the BBC was the push by my colleague, my longtime colleague, and one of my best friends, Dame Pippa Harris, who came in. Actually, she did some script reading for me when I was at Carlton Television. And then I gave her a job working for me. We worked together 4 years. And she was the one eventually who I'm very loyal and kind of like a tremendous sticker. I'm not saying Pippa isn't very loyal, she is, but I'm a tremendous sticker. And once I get there, I'm kind of like, I can't go because I've got to do this. I can't go because I've got to do that. And she was literally, Jane, we can't stay on ITV any longer. Come on, we're going. Go get us a job. I mean, she literally gave me that task of, you know, go find us something. And I'd had a few meetings with Alan Yentob and David Thompson, who I'd worked with, who was a huge mentor for me in my career, who I'd worked with as a script editor, said, come back to the BBC and make some single films and two-parters for us. And so that's what I did, taking Pippa with me.
And that was in that was as head of drama, basically, right? Or did that
was to start off with that moved quite quickly, because again, it's that thing of, you know, not often having the confidence. I've not always had the confidence to just go, right, I'll go in and I'll do that. I have to kind of like go in and look around. And they talked about various things. I was kind of like, no, I want a simpler life. I'll come in as an executive producer. And I think actually from memory, I did something. I actually think I said I'll work 4 days a week only, because I want to be able to think about, you know, setting up an indie or doing whatever other things. And I want a simpler life. I've been working phenomenally hard. So I'll come in as an executive producer for 4 days a week, and that lasted about 2 minutes. I went in as an executive producer. I made a piece, which is one of the pieces I made as a producer that I'm most proud of. It was a piece called Warriors, by Lee Jackson, that Peter Kosminski directed, about British peacekeeping forces in Bosnia. And I made that, and literally the minute I'd made that, they said, okay, you now need to do something different. And Michael Waring was retiring from the BBC, so they said, well, you can go in and be head of serials then. And that was a very, very big pair of shoes to fill. So it was kind of like, with that, you had to sort of avoid filling the shoes, but just get yourself your own pair of flip-flops to kind of like wear by the side of them, sort of thing. And so I went in and did that, and that remit gradually expanded. And then Mark Thompson came in and he changed the whole system at the BBC, and he put this drama commissioning system in. And that's when I became controller of drama commissioning. And that was really when I started to make a difference to the BBC, I think.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, my goodness, your legacy there. But I mean, one of the main, primary things that you resurrected Doctor Who. Tell me a little bit about that and how that really came about.
Well, again, I think that again speaks to the theme of, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I'd known since the show was stopped that the show must come back. I was a huge fan of Doctor Who. And to the extent that when I was an assistant floor manager, or I was wanting to become an assistant floor manager, I would go and offer to do the rehearsal room markups for the Doctor Who assistant floor managers, which were very, very complicated. The markups was when you had a big, you looked at a big thing that the design department had done, and then you had to mark up as to where it would be on a rehearsal room floor, and you marked it all up with masking tape, and you had to get it right. And the first one I did for the TARDIS, I realized I'd done the whole thing upside down and had to, on a Saturday, and had to rip it up and go back in on the Sunday and do it again for it to be ready for the Monday. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I became the controller of drama commissioning in 2000. And it took me until 2003 to say, okay, this is my cunning plan. This is what I think we should do. And it took me a while because I felt I had to prove myself, and I think that was right. I had to build BBC drama in the evening and on a weekday. I had to get the 9 o'clock piece right. BBC drama had to be modernized. Everything needed to be changed. Returning series had to be put at the heart of everything. Younger writers had to be brought in. Everything had to be done. And I had to get that right before I could turn around and say, right, let's bring back Doctor Who. So I did, when I had enough confidence and I could articulate and make a strategic argument as to why it should come back, as well as a hearts and minds one. And I was very lucky that Lorraine Hegarty, who was the controller of BBC One, really thought it was a good idea. To be clear, really very few other people thought it was a good idea, apart from Lorraine Hegarty, me and Russell T Davis. We all thought it was a great idea. But so it was a kind of like push. But Lorraine was.
Why didn't they think it was a good idea? Was that cost, or was it?
I think it was partly cost, because why would you spend drama money at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening? But I think it was partly because it was seen as sort of a bit laughable that, when it finished in the 1980s, people thought about it as wobbly sets and, tinfoil catsuits and, wobbly antennae kind of thing. And I didn't look beneath what it was, or the fact that maybe it was like that because it was very underfunded and wasn't quite loved at the time. I think there had been an attempt to bring it back in the 1990s, but that sort of got it wrong and done it as a single film and not looked. And so I think there was a lot of sense of potential failure around it. But I felt that it was the next kind of big step for BBC drama to do something that was much more full quadrant. Lorraine Hegarty talked a lot about building the schedule up from the sort of foundations, take the early evening piece and build the shows on top of them. Clearly, none of that is relevant anymore because everything exists in a digital space. But at the time, that was a big thing. And I felt that, well, if we built, we had to go earlier than Casualty, which was a big hit at 8 o'clock on a Saturday. But if we got this in at 7, leading into Casualty, you know, would this be a good thing to do? And she agreed. But I just had real faith that if we got Doctor Who out there in a modern way for an audience, that the audience would come. And that was a lot of faith, and it was a lot of stubbornness. We did actually do a piece of market research, I've talked about this quite a lot, which said no, there wasn't a huge audience for it. And I actually never shared that market research with anyone in the BBC. I said, okay, all right, well, we've got a job on our hands then. Come on, Russell. But it worked. And yeah, that was a good thing.
Oh my God. I mean, it's just, I know that you also just decided not to share this bit of commission. Yeah, you were just like, no, that's just not gonna, no one's gonna see that.
No, it's not really saying what I want it to say. So we'll just put that to one side. There was a time when so Michael Grade had finished the show as controller of BBC One in the 1980s. And he then arrived as chair of the BBC, just as we were talking about Doctor Who. And he wasn't very keen on the idea. You know, he'd finished it for good reason in the 1980s, and he's right. You know, he was. I'm absolutely sure he was right to do that. Everything needs to be rested sometimes, and Doctor Who, we were benefited in 2005 from the show having rested, and but he really didn't want it to happen, and he asked Mark Thompson, the then Director General, to stop it. And Mark said to me, Jane, you know, is it possible to stop it now? And I was kind of like, no, sadly not. No, it's not possible at all. Which it obviously would have been. But anyway, they were very good. They probably knew exactly what I was doing or what I was hiding and let me bash on with it. It worked, thank God.
But there's clearly, sorry, I had a feeling. I knew that the allotted time would simply not be enough, because I could literally talk to you for ages, but clearly there's moments in time in everyone's career where you just have to sort of, you have this gut instinct, you just know you have a vision, yes, and you've got to sort of just have blinders on and really kind of make some cheeky decisions, right, yes, to get something through.
Yes, you absolutely. I think once you've got a strong enough core to yourself as a human being, and I don't advise everyone to do this when they're starting out, but I think I've made 3 really, really risky decisions over time. One was, none of which I regret, or it might be the risky decisions I've made which I've conveniently forgotten about. But one was bringing Doctor Who back. The other was making a decision to just leave everything behind and pull up all my bridges and go to LA. And the other was not starting Bad Wolf, but it was putting so much money into the building of all studios and the early prep work on his Dark Materials, which I funded, and could have been an absolute financial disaster, and was very, very scary. And all of those 3 decisions, I was right to do it. And sometimes a bit of blind faith keeps you going. But yeah, it could have been a disaster, but it wasn't, thank God.
Well, tell me, let's just to move things along as well. I mean, actually segues quite well into my next question, which is about your US move, which is, that must have been, tell me a little bit about why you wanted to make the leap and sort of what it was like when you got there, because obviously having come the other way, it is a bit of culture shock, right?
Yeah, no, it was a huge culture shock, much, much more than I thought, because I had thought I really knew the US because I'd done a lot of sort of co-production work there. A lot of the strategy I built at the BBC was looking at getting co-production partners in and trying to up the budgets. And I thought I knew it. And almost within hours of landing in LAX to go and live and work there, I realized, oh my God, I know nothing. So I made a decision to go there really to kind of like force change. I thought I loved my job at the BBC and I loved the BBC, but I couldn't keep doing that job forever. partly because I wouldn't have enjoyed it anymore if I kept on and on doing it, and also because I think those jobs need a change of voice. You know, I have one way of looking at things, someone else would have another way. It needs to be changed. It's not fair on the industry to just have one sort of dominating presence. But I couldn't think of what else I would do in the UK. I wasn't ready to go off and just start an indie. I wanted to get more experience. And my kids were of an age where everyone said kids are really flexible at the age of 6/7, which mine were. Actually, turns out mine were not very flexible, but you know, you kind of like just go and do your best. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go, and I will always regret it. It's like a mecca, you know. It's like how I thought about London when I was in Oxford. When I was in London, eventually I began to think about Los Angeles like that, and I thought, I will regret it if I get to the end of my career and I haven't given this a go. So I went out there, and I went out there as a drama person. I went out there, one of the first things I did was I went to the Emmys for Little Dorrit. And at the same time as I was going to the Emmys for Little Dorrit, I was tasked with selling the US reformat of Top Gear. And it became apparent to me very quickly that the whole business affairs commercial strategy for drama in the US is a complete turnaround of what it's like in the UK. And actually, the way to support a business in the US, it's much easier to do that through unscripted than it is to do it through scripted. There aren't scripted individual independent production companies. And I really, really have my work cut out to break into that scripted arena, which is quite a closed shop. You know, there is, not because they don't welcome people from outside. I mean, they're much more welcoming, I think, you know, someone from Los Angeles arriving in London, but they're very welcoming, but that doesn't get you very far. And when it comes down to it, that town is really built on a relationship between agents and studios, and agents, studios, and broadcasters. And they will go for someone they know. Someone they know, maybe someone that they were at school with, that they were at university with. People don't, you know, there's not an awful lot of flux. They kind of like keep churning over in that bubble. And, you know, you're going to have to work very hard to get a chance as a newcomer. So I had a lot, and I had to make this business work. So I had a lot of early success in unscripted, which I knew absolutely fuck all about. And had to kind of like, you know, tell myself it's all about narrative and casting, and get into unscripted in order to get the company profitable, until I was able to think, all right, I've balanced the books, now I'm going to do scripted. And I did actually end up doing quite a lot of scripted in LA, but I mean, to say I scrabbled at the cliff walls of Hollywood until the blood ran from my fingertips to kind of like hold on and try and get to make something is really tangible and accurate.
Yeah, so I mean, you obviously you were behind one of my actually still favorite shows the night of. Are there, I mean, incredible, absolutely incredible. Are there others that you were really proud of in terms of your time there?
So I loved making Getting On. We did a reformat of Getting On for HBO with an amazing group of actors. And actually that was a really between Getting On and The Night Of, both of which were for HBO. Getting On was shot in a empty hospital in Pasadena, and was a really kind of simple shoot in many ways. And The Night Of was, I mean, probably the most influential piece of work I've ever done in terms of how I think about everything. It literally took 2 Obama presidencies to make it. Meeting Jim Gandolfini completely turned me around in my experience in Los Angeles. When I met him and we became good friends, because he was in the original pilot and he was an executive producer on The Night Of, and he explained so much to me, and gave me so much confidence, and really enabled me, I think, to go on and do what I did out there. But obviously his very sudden and sad death meant that the whole show sort of took much longer and sort of stumbled, was completely resurrected by the wonder that was John Turturro. But that relationship, and watching Stephen's Alien and how Stephen's Alien works, which is utterly different to any experience I'd ever had in the UK. The relationship, watching Riz Ahmed grow as an actor, filming in New York, which was when all of my decision about how I was going to start Bad Wolf and what it would be like, and that would come to Wales and how to put what into the community, was all worked through while I was in New York making The Night Of. Getting to know the producer on that, Scott Ferguson, who eventually I brought onto season 2 of Succession. It was just a really, really influential time. And for me, made my time in Los Angeles, unquestionably.
That's amazing. I mean, wow. And at that point now, you're sort of, obviously you were talking about Bad Wolf, really thinking about going and sort of setting up shop by yourself. And yeah, I remember actually when you came back to the UK and you sort of set up in Wales, and you mentioned that before as another really big risk that really felt like a kind of watershed moment for you in your life. Why Wales? Was it the funding? Was it sort of
it was a variety of things. I think it was when I worked in New York, which I worked with, we did a pilot for Fox Television, which I shot in New York, and then all of this time on The Night Of. And I was really struck by two things. I was really struck by the passion, conviction, and sense of community of the crew who were New York based. And it reminded me very much of the crews in Wales that we'd worked with on Doctor Who, and then again on Da Vinci's Demons, which I'd made a few years earlier in Swansea when we were in Los Angeles. That was a 3-part series that we made for Stars. And I was amazed by the tenacity and the creativity of the Welsh crews, which seemed like a sort of best kept secret. But the other thing I was really struck by in New York was how some of those jobs were generational. And just at a time when a lot of the industry in Wales that had been generational and the jobs that had been sort of fueling the place were beginning to die off, I thought, well, what if they didn't? What if Wales, which is, it's got this incredible production and creative community in it, and these amazing spaces and brilliant locations, and it's very near London. I mean, when you're in Los Angeles, the amount of time it takes you to get from HBO in Santa Monica to NBC in Burbank is the length of time it would take you to drive from London to Cardiff. What's the big issue? Your sense of distance changes, and in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, I think we could bring some of that New York thinking to Wales. I'd also become very keen on filming in studios, and a lot of Night Of was shot in a studio, even though it looks like it's kind of like
brownstone
location. Yeah. And I thought, okay, there's space in Wales to do that. I had a good relationship with the Welsh government from the work that we'd done there. And one of the things I wanted to do was establish a partnership through my independent production company, which would enable a sense of payback or training and philanthropy. I was at a stage with starting an independent production company where I wanted to do more than just something that makes the shows, and that actually to settle it in a community and have as a committed part of what we were doing, to force myself to hold my feet to the fire, that we would also do this. And I had a dream of opening a studio with a classroom in it. Must go all the way back to the start of the conversation and my parent-teacher roots, and my feeling that I never knew anyone before getting into this business. And if I could do that, other people can. But I was lucky. I had an education. I went to university. I was able to access being able to get in through the door through that. Lots of people can't. But if we put a classroom in the studio in Cardiff, if we have school kids come in from the age of 9, now it's from the age of 7, and we show them all the jobs that people are doing and explain all the opportunities that there are available and get inside their heads at an early age, then this will be something we can grow. As we grow Bad Wolf, they can grow with us. Let's keep helping. Let's build that community and crew base in Wales. And we've been going at this for 7 years now. And some of the people who were in our classroom are now working in our industry. So that was the dream. That's why I came to Wales. The Welsh government helped enormously. And it was complicated to achieve, much easier to get, backing from someone straightforward, if you like. But I'm very, very glad that we did what we did.
A spark of hope is alive among humankind. The time is coming.
Imagine me and you, I do. I think about you day and night. It's only right.
Are you happy with everyone hating you?
Well, no, it's not lovely.
So happy together.
Guys, you feel that? That energy?
Take what you deserve.
You are insufferable.
It's work, innit?
I can't see me loving nobody but
We are free!
Someone tell me what the hell is going on here?
This is but one world among many. Choose your own adventure.
And obviously, Julie Gardner was your partner in all of this, and can you speak a little bit about the kind of the importance of having a partner, like Julie, but also just in general, and what it really takes to make that work? Because it's not always easy.
No, I think that if you look at most successful independent production companies, they've always got a partnership. Whatever that partnership may consist of. Sometimes it's creative and someone who's more sort of business affairs and more strategic. Other times it's a dual creative partnership. Julie and I had worked together for many years. She'd come out to Los Angeles. We'd worked together in Los Angeles. And we didn't want to give up the good relationships and contacts that were made in Los Angeles. And we knew that with Bad Wolf, what we wanted to do was have something that was based in the UK and took advantage of UK talent, way of working and everything that, and the UK terms of trade and how that works. But we wanted to very firmly keep our eyes on sort of international high-end television. So one of us was going to come back and one of us would stay in Los Angeles. We prepped this idea without really knowing who was going to stay and who was going to go, and actually almost being quite nervous of having that conversation, because it was going to be an upheaval, for whoever. It was going to be an upheaval for whoever stayed. It was a change, but it was going to be an upheaval for whoever went too. Anyway, in the end, it was me who went. There was a period of time in the early weeks when I was sitting in an office in Swansea. We thought we were really going to go quite far west. Cardiff came sort of slightly later where we settled. And I was sitting in an office in Swansea with my assistant, and everyone else was in Los Angeles. The sort of development team was based in Los Angeles, and Julie was there. And I was sitting there and I was kind of like, I'm not sure how this one's going to go. But gradually, one foot at a time, one day at a time, one to-do list at a time, we grew the company over here. But, clearly, Julie, to have done that on my own without Julie, I mean, I might have been here on my own, but Julie was there. It just, none of this would have happened without that.
Do you advise people who are sort of looking to set up, production companies maybe a bit later in their career, maybe even earlier, but like, do you vouch for that, sort of just finding someone that you work really well with and kind of building that up? Yeah.
I think it's lonely and scary. And to do it on your own. Whereas if you do it with someone else, you've got, it's possible to keep hope alive. You know, development can turn to ashes in your mouth really quickly. You know, you could be working on the most amazing piece with the most amazing writer, and all it takes is a commissioning brief to change, or someone decide they're going to put their money somewhere else, whatever it might be. And suddenly this thing that you were going to spend the next 2 years of your life doing just goes. And to have someone who you can normalize that with, and just, okay, next, onwards. Julia and I, we always, and nearly always our emails are signed off onwards, or kind of like, you know, in Julie's case, hoot, march on, or whatever it might, you know, that there is a sense, if you've got someone to share it with, it's just another day. You just turn that wheel and keep at it. And I just couldn't have done that on my own.
What about when people are thinking about sort of the money and the financing and sort of the commercial side of things? You know, what do folks need to keep in mind in terms of backers and partners? And you know, when do alarm bells, for example, go off for you?
I think alarm bells go off if you feel that you're going to be very boxed in. So I never took a deal, for example, with a broadcaster, which would have been an overall deal. I've had a deal with HBO for in different ways for quite some time, but it's always just been quite a small deal, and has been more about being part of the family, as opposed to, you know, that's the only place you can work. And not have an alarm deal at anything that boxed you in. If you're taking money from a studio or distributor, you know, you need to look really closely at who else are they backing, and what kind of programming are they doing, and make sure that you feel you fit into that. So for Bad Wolf to make a choice to take backing from Sony, for example, in the next iteration of its life, it was, okay, look at Left Bank. What has Sony done with Left Bank? Look at 11. What has Sony done with 11, and how does Bad Wolf fit in between Left Bank and 11? And Bad Wolf has sort of got a place in the middle between the two somehow, and so it made sense. But there were other places where maybe other people were supplying what Bad Wolf were already supplying, or you felt that they would be looking for something different. So I think, you know, when you're looking for money, make sure that what you're providing is what the people who are backing you really want, because the problems will start when you take money and people want something different from you.
That's great advice. Absolutely. I'm being told, unfortunately, we have to wrap up after this last question. So I'm going to ask you, Jane, because I know that obviously I love the idea, your sort of vision of the classroom and the studio. And when people are obviously given an opportunity by Bad Wolf, how do they sort of ride the wave to get where they want to go? Like what sort of qualities are you looking for in sort of young people coming through the company, maybe, you know, folks who are listening to this session itself? Like what sort of characteristics that do people really need in order to kind of like push themselves and to get to, just as you did, really?
Well, I always say I employ for talent and passion, and commitment, and not for experience. So I don't mind where people have worked before or not worked before. I have no interest in whether people have been to university or not been to university, or what class of degree they've got. What I'm interested in is whether they love television, and why they love television, and what they want to do, and that they will be passionate about Bad Wolf and being able to achieve what they want to achieve within that, and they'll be reliable and committed. When we've worked with people like that within Bad Wolf, they always, without exception, rise.
Amazing. Okay, we've got some quick fire questions here now. Yes. So I'm gonna go directly into this. Was there a particular show on TV that made you want to work in the industry?
I think there were shows on television that made me love television, Doctor Who, Star Trek. But I think the shows that really turned it around for me and made me think this is a world I want to inhabit were shows, like very female-driven shows, like Paula Mills' Angels, Rachel and the Rorettes, The Rock Follies. They're all of a particular era, and they were all about badass women busting out of the conventions that people were trying to place them in. And that's when television really got inside of me, and I thought, that's what I want to do.
Very cool. What has been the best show on TV that you've watched recently?
Okay, so temptation, obviously, to join in with the rest of the world and say The Last of Us, and the rest of the UK, and soon to be the rest of the world, and say Happy Valley. But just to make the difference, I will say The Lying Lives of Adults, which I absolutely love. I mean, I love Elena Ferrante, and I love the slowness and detail of the adaptations, both the HBO, My Brilliant Friend, and now this one for Netflix. I love it.
You read the book too?
I did not read, at least I've read My Brilliant Friend. I have not read this one.
First job in the industry?
First job in the industry was as a secretary for the script editor of radio drama at the BBC.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you very, very much. You're very, very good. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much to Jane Tranter for that fantastic chat. She's always such a pleasure to speak with. There is one day of the festival left to go. And if you enjoyed my discussion with Jane, you may be interested in our panel discussion, What I Wish I'd Known on My First Day of Set, which is free on Zoom at 3 p.m. tomorrow. We also have our queer filmmaking and adversity discussion tomorrow on Zoom at 1:30 p.m. and a filmmaker's guide to movie posters here on YouTube at 4 p.m. Tickets are free and still available, so head over to the BFI website for more information. I'm Minoria Ravindran, and thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next time.